We're privileged to have with us this evening people who are going to start carrying us on our way. Our reflection groups gave us some opportunity to start thinking about what our gifts are, what our callings are, where our feelings are, where our emotions, passions are called to meet the work. And this evening, Lucy Duncan, the director of Friends Relations for the American Friends Service Committee, and another wonderful colleague to have helped in the planning of this event. Thank you. And Matt Pilisher. Where did he go again? That wonderful man. He stepped off, but he's going to get a big round of applause. People keep saying, oh, you've really brought together such wonderful people. Well, most of them are people that Matt knew. Lucy and Daniel, on the other hand, are also people that I know, so I'm going to just say Lucy is here to introduce Daniel, who, of course, was introduced earlier this morning, but Lucy is going to at least briefly introduce a method and a means of standing with as a means of organizing, and she'll be having a workshop on this spirit-led organizing principle tomorrow. But for now, Lucy, and then you'll introduce Daniel, and
well,
he will...
actually, we're going to kind of...
Oh, you're going to...
You invited two rebels onto stage, so...
Oh, okay.
Something will happen.
Take it away.
Hi, it's great to be here. It's been wonderful to be here for the last few days, or for the last day and a half. So following up on Lisa, I wanted to start with this poem, which I wrote actually in December, a couple months after the Coalition for Real Justice in Philly started to form. And it's called, and I think it has a lot to do with what we're doing here, and it's called Spirit Uprising. It rained all day on Christmas Eve this year. The sun slanted in the morning. I rode around the burial ground, circling. The mud clung to my tires. A brown leaf stuck in the spokes. Shh. The bare trees' branches rested like bones. The damp earth waits, holding sorrow, holding promise. A week ago, I sat on the stairs in a church in West Philly. All the seats were taken. 500 converged to mourn, to raise voices, to turn pain into revolution. Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Brandon Tate Brown, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Emmett Till. Didn't they have dreams? We utter their names as a prayer. Ghosts sit on the windowsill watching. A street light streams through the stained glass. Illusion crumbles, myths exposed. The foundation cracks. What will we stand on? Miles away, a 3-year-old girl dances on the subway platform. One by one, the people join her, remembering who they are, that this is what we are born for. We will keep walking, marching, praying, holding sorrow, holding promise. We will remember the casualties of fear. We will stand on love to disrupt all that shackles joy.
So this evening we wanted Lucy and I to offer some different tools that we found useful for movement building. And they may be tools that you'll find useful, or they may be tools that you'll find useful to introduce other people to. But we wanted to offer some tools, and in that spirit, the movement building really starts with where the people are. So I wanted to ask, how are you all doing? It's been a long day.
Yeah. We are energized and exhausted.
Energized and exhausted.
We can take them wherever we want.
Some of you look more energized than others. Some more exhausted than others. Nap time, yes. Some took naps during the day. Lovely. So glad for that. So I wanted to invite us, each of us, just to get a chance to do a little bit of further reflection. So I want to invite you to, in a moment, just to turn to somebody next to you who you don't know. So maybe you're sitting with your peoples, but turn to at least one person who you don't know, and share with them this sort of response to this question, which is, what's something that you have heard or seen or that's moved in your heart today that confirms something that's already been moving inside of you? I mean, you're talking about spirit. So it could be something that you're already doing, and you're saying, what I am doing really got confirmed by something that I heard someone else saying. Or it could be, maybe some of you some of you have been in this for many, many years, and you guys have seen many ups and downs through the course of this movement. And so maybe it's something that you've been reminded of, and you said, this is why I'm in this work, or this is something that really is an important reminder to me. Or maybe you're new, maybe you haven't been involved in this for very long, but you thought, you know what, there's something that's been a direction inside my own life that's I'm moving in this direction, I'm realizing something anew, and that got confirmed today, through the course of today. So use that question just as a prompting, just to connect with one other person who you haven't connected with yet. So someone new who you haven't met with. So if you'll finish that thought. Too much fun. What was fun about it, Hollister? What was something that you shared, Hollister, since you already jumped out? I'm putting you on the spot.
I shared that I came here discouraged.
That you came discouraged.
I've been really working hard, doing the work of returning citizens stuff, and we're financially pretty fragile.
Yeah.
And I've been in the position of being the accountant and the bookkeeper, and I'm going, no, we don't have the money to do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Working with a visionary who sees all the possibilities.
Uh-huh.
This has reminded me, this is so important. You've got to find the money. So friends, if you know people with money, help the organizations that are doing this work, because they're very fragile
Yeah.
financially.
Yeah.
But I'm re-inspired.
Yeah. So I hear you connecting back to vision
Yes, I got too much mired
in the day-to-day,
yeah.
and that sometimes we have to pull back. So that's something that's being affirmed. What else? Other things that were moving inside of you? Yes, sir.
I just want to say this is my first time being around. I really didn't know anything about it.
Can you stand up? This we can't hear you.
I know you can talk louder than that.
Is there a mic? Can somebody run around with the mic?
Humbling and great experience to be around humble people. Sometimes when even in the movement you have people that really don't care. And to be around people that's genuine, and I was just telling them that cares, and just you can be yourself. You don't have to, look at the next person or feel a certain way. You actually can be yourself. That's amazing in its own. And I just want to thank John for bringing me here.
That's 3 people you know, John.
Are you going to be doing this a lot,
Yeah,
so I should run around the room
Sure,
with
we'll
the
get to see you
microphone?
run around.
It's going to interfere with the video. That's the only
Yeah.
thing.
Let's
that
just take
I'm
one or two more.
concerned.
Just one or two more. A couple other things that you've been gaining while here, affirming what's inside of you. Yeah, Paul.
I actually was.
Speak into the mic.
Oh yeah, I was actually influenced by Mike. But Mike said something which really touched me. He says, passionate. He said, you have to go back to your people, to white people. And I said, okay. And I think that is basically something we had been doing already, because we are. In Brooklyn, we are out in front of the Supreme Court with a big sign, and on the big sign is a sign saying, too many of our fellow black citizens are in prison. Just basically addressing it as fellow citizens. They are in prison. It is an injustice. So we're addressing that with a pamphlet, addressing to the white people who pass by, and greatly, wonderfully, we get supported by black folks who sing right on and, bless you and things like that. White folks are a little bit more aloof. They come by and they give us some nice things. So I was thinking of going on the right track in that direction. So support for that.
Working with your peoples.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I just want to mark around that. One of the things I really just want us to affirm, when I came in and sort of spent time with folks here, just realized how much work has been happening. And I heard a lot of people who really need more appreciation for the work that they've been doing. And that I say that with a tenuousness because I already identify myself as a rebel, and rebels, our primary role is to push people. And currently, I want to push you to affirm yourselves, and that's a new spot for me. But I think in part because for some of you, you've been in it for a long time, and I think it's important that we get seen for the work that y'all have been doing. And so I'm just, and that spirit. So one more thing, and then we'll close, knowing there's other voices who also wanted to get in. But yeah, William.
Hi. I think I work with a lot of, I'd say, conservative folks in my community. I work with a lot of leaders, elected leaders, and folks that need to. They're used to sort of the 30-second soundbite, and if you don't catch them on that, they shy away. And one of the things that I think that's really helped me here is the importance of the visualness of the disparity of our incarceration rates compared to other communities. And to me, what happens is you show a person that, the first thing they're going to ask is why? And then they're going to start asking questions about the whole issues, and it opens the door to be able to actually have a conversation as opposed to having somebody shut down immediately thinking that this is another Save the Tree campaign or something other than that.
As someone who's worked on a lot of Save the Tree campaigns as well, how beautiful is that? And actually, I was talking to a couple of folks about, just because you mentioned Save the Trees as a reference point, I've been working on climate change, and I've been talking about how I'm coming at this issue from climate change, where when we're talking about climate change, what we're saying is more Katrinas. We're talking about very wealthy people. They'll be doing all right as long as the environment stays at a certain level and they can keep enough people down. And the people who they're keeping down, that's why I come at it from that direction.
There might be other wealthy people they're keeping down.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to do this evening, if it's all right to keep moving, and is that all right?
Yes, please. A comment, but I can keep moving.
Okay, thanks. So one of the things that we wanted to do this evening is, like I said, to introduce a couple of different tools that might be useful. And in some ways, Paul, I think it's speaking to this question. One of the tools is about how to assist, I say white folk, but I mean more than just white folk. I mean people who are coming from places of privilege. And that's many of us who have a lot of resource based on different life circumstances that were just handed to us. And how do we engage in a way that follows the leadership of formerly incarcerated people, returning citizens, whatever language it is that we want to use, and those who are getting hardest hit by that, which includes families. So that's part of what Lucy's going to look at. And then we want to sort of continue to explore that. I said I'm a rebel, and I guess that's a good introduction to explain. Also, how do we do that in ways that are powerful and that can support us to access the most amount of power we can do. So that's just context for the evening for those of you who want to know where we're heading. That's the short piece.
Okay.
Take it away.
So this is, the audience for this piece is sort of my people, white people, Quaker people. And this is really sort of a description of sort of a way of working on issues. And it's really about addressing, like, the system of mass incarceration is an unstable system because it's based on inequality, and Daniel's going to talk a lot more about that. And it's propped up by certain things, and which we've been talking about a lot. And we found some people in Denver who, some Unitarian ministers that had studied Parker Palmer's Circles of Trust, which is a sort of powerful way to be together in community. And they, out of that, developed this sort of organizing model and principles about organizing that's not as much about the what, like the campaigns, but more is about how, and how to companion people, and how to really center yourself in being accompaniers of the people that are most impacted by the oppression that you're trying to interrupt. And what's really cool about this model is that embedded in it is trying to disrupt two of the sort of some of the pillars that maintain the system. And one of the big pillars that we heard about a lot this afternoon from Heather Ann Thompson is the way that we have a carceral society, that our society is so deeply imbued with retributive or punitive justice, and that it's deep in our tissues. It's deep in our tissues the way racism is deep in our tissues, that the assumptions of that come up. I mean, as a parent, I see myself come up with punitive, measures. I'm a Quaker parent, and I find myself having these impulses. And so this model is sort of one sort of part of it, and the foundation for the model is that if we want to create a society built on restorative or healing justice, we actually have to practice it with each other in intimate settings where we can make mistakes and where we can come back together and learn how to really be together in a deep way that's about wholeness and about healing and about forgiveness and learn how to be with each other. And so at the base of this model is the idea of restorative justice or healing justice. And the model is focused around small groups that come together and talk about restorative justice and how they want to be together. And the formation of the group is based on agreeing to a covenant about how you will be together. Some guidelines for just the sort of common covenant that you make together, but that you really are very intentional about the kind of community and the kind of relationships that you want with one another. And that's really the sort of formation of the group. And then the other really primary principle is to disrupt white supremacy. And white supremacy is based on white people being in charge and white people thinking, I've seen so many people who move from, so many Quakers who often move from being educated to wanting to deal with policy immediately. And there's kind of and that is kind of from a position of privilege, like, we're in this position of being in charge of things, and we can go and we can impact policy. And that's not to say that impacting policy is not really critically important, but what gets missed is this important step of getting really deeply connected and being led by the people that are most impacted. And so the other foundational sort of piece of this to sort of create something else is accompaniment, and very deep accompaniment. So when the group forms, the first thing that you would do is do what people have been talking about this weekend. Find the people that are most impacted, that are doing the work, build relationships with those people. And in this model, you actually do not take action unless the community that needs your support asks you. And it's very different from a lot of the sort of common way that Quakers work is, let's follow the leading that we have and move. Instead, the leadings are in the community that really needs the support. And so those are the two sort of foundational principles, and there's a lot of reinforcement of practicing those principles. And so the way that these small groups are organized is that they meet twice a month and gather together. And the way that you spend the first hour is by telling stories with each other, starting by doing spiritual practice, and then telling a story about an action that you've taken in support of the community that you're trying to support. And then spiritually reflecting on that action. How did that action change you? What mistakes did you make? What did you learn from that action? And not only does the person who was there tell the story, but other people who were also there may tell the story, but you also get people to tell the story of how that story impacted them. And so it's a very, very communal. There's a really foundational understanding that we are a collective and that we do things together and the work is really shared and that we are learning deeply from one another. And it's only after that hour of real deep reflection of thinking about what it is you've done that you turn to the business. What do we need to get done? And so another piece of this that sort of is the goal is to move and center the spirit and stories. And the stories are a real key part of being able to access the spirit. And so the idea is that these alternative pillars will help us to get back to recentering the community and to a whole community by practicing these things together and supporting and deeply, deeply and powerfully accompanying people who people, clearly would benefit from our support in a way that's not putting ourselves forward. That doesn't mean that we who are standing in solidarity are standing in front, but actually where we should be standing. So that's the model. Greg and I are going to do a workshop tomorrow if you want to learn more about it. And I think that what Daniel is going to talk about is sort of knits together with this well.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah.
So Lucy's talking about how we build up, and I love talking about how we'll tear down. So I wanted to introduce a model that I found useful, or one way to think about sort of building this question of how do we take on an issue as large as mass incarceration. And so it starts with, I think, an important starting point, which is no system of oppression is stable. Systems of oppression are unstable creatures. That is to say, they require an incredible amount of support to keep them up. It requires a tremendous amount of telling young black boys that they don't matter and telling white kids that it's all right to ignore the needs of others. Whole systems of, what we're learning, what we're being talked about today was whole systems of control that are created. And one way we can view that is overwhelming. Another way we can view that is it is an unstable system, somewhat like an upside-down triangle. So if you think of mass incarceration, we'll call this upside-down triangle mass incarceration. We're speaking very generally here. Okay, we're going to pretend like my spelling is correct and not worry about it from there. So if that's mass incarceration, there are many different pillars of support that keep it up. For example, what are some of them? Money. Whose money?
Taxpayers' money.
Taxpayers' money. Taxpayer money. What else?
The victim's money.
We're selling money. Money is important here. We got to track the money.
Right.
Yep.
Even the kids that are in jail, they've got to pay for everything. They've got to pay for their phone calls home. They got to, when they get out, they got to pay for the food they ate and all the rest.
Great. So victim money.
Fear.
Fear. Whose fear?
Police's fear.
Police fear of what?
That is the fear of being a victim of crime.
Right. So police have been built up a whole series of things that is created inside of them, a whole storyline. And then when they huddle, right? We all see police doing their huddle thing later, right, after each. So police do their huddle thing, and so police are, for example, one whole pillar unto themselves. And one of the pillars that keeps them up, you could almost like treat police as their own little upside-down triangle unto itself, right? And then you can look at, well, police, for example, so their fear is one thing. What else keeps the police up?
Fear in the community.
Sure.
Through the various propaganda means, the fear-mongering that happens, from the top.
And what generates it? Like, what's one thing that generates that fear in the community?
Control.
Media.
I'm just asking him, because there's a lot of people.
Well, again, I think that it's a fear that's inculcated by forces who want to be in control.
Like what?
I'm talking about forces of authority and governance.
Yeah.
Want to have control over the whole social system, and one way of doing that is to keep the people in the social system afraid.
That's right. And what I'm going for here is, what's the mechanism by which they create fear? So,
one example is propaganda.
So it's propaganda, right? So propaganda is something which is interesting because when I go onto my Facebook page, what I read and see is propaganda. And I see a lot of things that make me scared. I mean, I'm telling you what's going on for me. I don't know what's going on for you. But when I read my Facebook page, it's filled with a lot of things that also are extreme language, extreme incidents, horrible things that can support fear. So in fact, we have a role to play in some of these things. And this is where this model starts to get interesting, which is on their own, the folks who are most benefiting from mass incarceration do so by our consent. I'll say it again because it's important, it's challenging, it's deep, but that on their own, they cannot implement all of these systems of control. That people we know that we are play roles in this that keep this system afloat by our consent. And so that one of the ways that this model, we can get very detailed. So we can start talking about police and we can talk about details around how exactly police get their resource and so on and so forth. And there are multiple ways in which we touch these institutions and that we can be involved in keeping them afloat. So I'll give an example. Some of you know Susan Burton, who is a woman who, I'm blanking now on the name, A New Way of Life in California. And she's talked about this issue of mass incarceration and said, one of the pillars here is this system relies on a particular judicial system that says if you get charged for some kind of crime, probability says, some of you will know the statistic, I kind of fluff them, 85, 95% of people, 95% of people take plea bargains. It's a very rational choice when faced with mandatory minimums or extreme sentencing. And so a huge number of people take plea bargains, whether they're guilty or not, whether they're, etc. So she said, well, what if all of the folks who were in this process of taking plea bargains said no? She said, it's not even we need most or all of them. A small percentage, my town, Richmond, Indiana, 35,000 people, if we had a couple hundred people in Richmond refuse to go along with the plea bargain way of operating and said instead we want a jury trial, my town of Richmond, Indiana could not handle it, could not deal with it. Philly already cannot deal with the amount of influx that's happened. So this is, I'm hoping you're catching the flavor, which is this is a different way into this situation than some of us sometimes come at it, which is looking at what are some of the different actions that we could do by removing a pillar of support. Go ahead, Pierce.
One of the pillars that's going to remove itself because it's inherently unstable is fear. Fear is not a stable thing.
So it needs control, it needs mechanisms, it needs things, it needs media, it needs support, it needs conditioning of the mind through schooling, a sense of respect of authority, and constant reinforcement. So that would be another one. Maybe there are interventions that we could make that remove that pillar of support.
Could you repeat what he said? Because
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I forgot. So he said that, and hopefully I'm characterizing this right, he said that fear needs a lot of support in order to keep it up. Right. And it needs a constant affirmation, and that it's inherently unstable. Yeah. And therefore, that's why these systems exist the way they do. And therefore, one way we can analyze, so I'll give a different example just far outside of mass incarceration just for a second, if we can leave it. So this model, for example, was taught by folks in Otpor in Serbia. So this is a completely different situation, but they were facing a dictator who was brutal. I mean, this guy, the last time they tried an uprising, this is about 20 years ago, that when they tried an uprising, he went and just slaughtered everybody who was involved in the protests. Right. He was known as the Butcher of the Balkans. Right. And so this group of activists said, what we need to do is we need to change the way that we were thinking of it. Before they were thinking, what we're going to do is we would simply educate the population until they would rise up. And so they began doing these education actions, et cetera. And what they realized is that they weren't changing the conditions of power. And so what we have to do is we have to change the conditions of power. And so the way that they went about that was they began identifying, they had every single person in their movement go through training. Every single person in their movement did this training where they got to meet the upside down triangle. And they said, okay, so dictator Milosevic, what are some of the different pillars? And they began analyzing them, looking at, for example, police. That was one of their key areas where they said, we're gonna actively remove the police. So they began doing actions that were specifically targeting how do we get the police to defect in high numbers. Mm-hmm. And so they would do, some of them were just ways that they would treat them. So for example, rather than treating them as enemies, they treated them as enemies to be. And so they were there was lots of spies and informants. And so in their meetings, they would have these gatherings. And so, we'd be all hanging out. And they would say to their informant, let's just say you're the informant in this moment, they would say to the informant, don't worry, you'll have an opportunity to join us. And that was their message that they would send. They would also joke around with their informant. So they would do things like, they would say, which group has a better informant? We like our informant more than the other. So they also stayed light and prankstery about the way that they operated. But they also began very actively targeting police over a period of time. They did a couple of different actions. So one, for example, they would go there's a memorial day for police officers who have been killed. So on that day, they would do a big mass action. And they would write up and call out all the names of police officers who have been killed in the line of duty. And then they would follow that by calling all the names of people who had been killed in the line of duty as community activists, folks for liberation of their country. So they were making the signal, we're together on this. Yeah. You too are being manipulated. Right. Another action that they would do, and we'll see the reception of this, people would get beaten up by police regularly. So one of the guys who was working with a guy named Ivan Morovich, he got beaten up by police officers, and they found his badge number. And so they did what they would often do, which is they would go to his house, and they would hold up signs of Ivan's brutalized face, and they would turn it not at the house, but at his neighbors, pictures blown up, and they would say, is this what you want your neighbors to do? Right. Wow. They escalated. After that, when that didn't work for some of these folks, they then began going, we'll see how this gets received, they began going to their kids' homes of the police officers. The kids' schools, of the police officers, and they began saying, is this the kind of thing that your parents should be doing? They were going to pull these people out. They were going to make it so that police no longer wanted to beat them up. It got to the point where Milosevic, when he would order people to go out and break up those set of protesters, they weren't willing to do it. So I tell that story in part because I think that would be one way of thinking of a long arc for a movement, which is what are some of these key pillars of support that we should be taking out? What are some of the different ways that we can identify pillars of support who are keeping this system propped up and think about how do we remove them out? Yeah, Joan D.
You talk about the pillar of support in terms of the plea bargaining. Yes, that has validity, right? But you also have to think of the cost of what you're asking.
Yes.
Because I was in trial and I pled guilty, I took a plea bargain for 20 years because I was looking at 75.
Yes.
Right.
So you're asking someone to make an awesome sacrifice for their life.
Risk. Right.
We can discuss this in theory, but what about reality?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how these fit together.
I'm so glad you're raising this question.
Could you kind of repeat what?
Yeah. So the way I heard your question, your statement was, the plea bargain, going back to that incident, has an incredible sacrifice to it. Because it's one thing to say, in theory, hey, let's do this action. It's another thing to talk about what is a human cost? What is the cost to the people who, instead of, and he was describing himself as, instead of taking a plea bargain for 20 years, would be in there for 72. And this is, I think, one of the places where, and I'm now going to speak to the Quakers in the room, which is the question of what is the sacrifice that we're up for when we're saying we're interested in joining this movement. And just this weekend, I was working with a group of various young folks doing interesting stuff, including a lot of Black Lives Matter folks and also Dream Defenders, who a bunch of folks in Dream Defenders down in Florida, they occupied the building and they risked getting criminal records in order to try to advance their cause. And that was a risk that they were willing to take. And one of the things that they said to me is they said, we want to know where are the rest of the people who are willing to take risks with us. Am I pushing yet? Okay. Go ahead, Lucy.
Well, I was going to say that's where the sort of these models intersect. I mean, I think that there's that who's making the sacrifice. I mean, this is a really great example of where perhaps, not necessarily in the plea bargain instance, but that there are things that allies can do, and it's not as great a risk for them to take it. And so to stand with somebody means that you're willing to take the risk. And what I've seen is that using the model, one of the examples is there's, you may have heard of a church, a Unitarian church, that took a man who was going to be deported into sanctuary in Denver. And those people were using this model. And what it did is they stayed with the immigrant community and gained the capacity to take risks themselves. And so I think that that's another really big piece. The sacrifice and the willing to really stand with means that you're going to be standing in the way of things too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in power, in the militarism, in the Pentagon providing weapons and training for the police forces, and want to make sure that that's one of the pillars that gets listed, because I feel like, they've got all these, they always have our tax dollars, and, they're making all these weapons, and they just need a place to, get them. And so when the military's saturated, they, spread them out to the police force. And this is like, they kind of go unscathed. Like, they don't get named. And I want to make sure that we name them.
Great.
We come up with something.
So naming militarism as one of the pieces.
The arms manufacturers.
Yep. Yep. So arms manufacturers. I'm reminded of, Nancy, where are you? Nancy Brigham is in Keene, New Hampshire, which has a tank. How many people live in Keene? 22,000. Jesus. Well, that makes them suspicious. But no, so yeah, thought back there.
Just two quick comments. You've probably seen Bringing Down a Dictator.
Right.
It's a 50-minute long documentary that tells the story of entrepreneur. I don't know that they tell the story you told so well, but it's a really wonderful instructional tool. And sometimes it does help to step outside of our own nation to see how one can creatively challenge in a new time, in a different way, oppressive authority. And then, to me, the other pillar, which Michelle Alexander's book just blew me away, because it just didn't click for me, is the implicit oppression within America's judiciary system.
Right.
Plea bargaining is an important part of it, but there's so many other elements, and I knew nothing about it at all.
Right.
Great. So you're holding up judicial system, which has so many elements to it. And again, one of the reasons I'm offering this is when I go about developing a campaign for my own group, when I work on a campaign, part of what I think about is what's the slice that I'm working on? And partially because Appor used to have a saying that they would quote people that by themselves the rulers cannot bake bread, they don't milk cows, they don't build roads, they don't do all the functions that society does. We do those things. We who are workers, we do those things. And that without us doing those things, society does not continue going forward. And therefore, we have an incredible amount of power in that way of looking at it. But we only can afford, and this goes to the cost question, we can only afford to pay that cost when we're focused rather than dispersed. So I'm thinking of, I don't know if Gail is here, but Gail is talking about, and a couple of other folks here have been talking about developing campaigns to do boycotts against corporations who are profiting off of prison labor.
Right.
McDonald's, for example,
Right.
who people make uniforms.
Right.
Eddie Bauer, etc. So this is what happens, right? So we start naming lots of different groups, and I'll guarantee you strategically you will not be able to win if you go after 4 at once.
Right.
And that one of the powers of our ability to pull out pillars of support is by identifying one that we want to target at a particular moment. One that we think might be vulnerable enough that it fits our capacity, or at least if we grow ourselves a little bit. And also focusing on one that we think might be more interesting to pick than another for some reason. Maybe we think if we move Eddie Bauer, maybe McDonald's and Victoria's Secret might also come along. But that a mistake that we can make is if we spread ourselves so thin when we're doing this kind of action, we spread ourselves so thin that we're off doing Eddie Bauer and we're off doing and we're off doing. And I think one of the things that sort of the Black Freedom Movement taught us is the power of focus. The narrative, when I say the Montgomery bus boycott, that clicks in a whole bunch of images. And they did that not because they picked 10 things, they did it because they gave one story that would be a powerful narrative and were willing to go at it and focus in on it. Yes?
I just wanted to make a slight comment, but also point out the fact that I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, we've let this go under control, or this was, it's too much, and there's too much militarization now." These are all intentional pillars.
Yes.
And the system of mass incarceration was built
Yes.
from the ground up. You have to build the foundation first. So these foundations were established before the effective mass incarceration happened.
That's right.
They had to jump on us, of course, for centuries. But I just wanted to make that clear that this is an intentional structure of foundation for mass incarceration. It's not something that happened. It is not something
It wasn't an accident.
This is not we paying tax. This was designed just like this out of slavery.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just make that point so everybody can understand it, maybe come to grips with that.
Yeah. And I appreciate that also because it helps us when we run our campaigns against particular pillars, there's someone on the other side trying to keep them on. Right? So we're trying to pull them out, but someone else is trying to keep them in.
So we always have to be mindful.
And so we're in, what are the forces that are pulling on them in different ways? And so one of the things that, like Lucy's example of the movement around sanctuary, which this is a movement that, if you're not tracking, is growing because, I think I said it earlier this morning, deportations are massively increasing in the number, the range, et cetera. And it's turning into big money, which is, of course, one of the ways it gets institutionalized in a capitalist economy. But that this action of sanctuary is also growing as more and more people are realizing this is a way that faith communities, I was about to say churches, but there's been synagogues and other folks who've also been involved, that faith communities can express their sentiment in a way that is not just a statement like what do you guys call them? Minutes. But is about action. And the value of it has to do with you're in an oppositional force to somebody else. You're trying to pull that away, that pillar out, even as others are trying to keep it in. And so I think that confrontational way of viewing it is also helpful. So I want to pause there and we'll just grab a couple of questions. So I see Bob in the back.
Why don't we have people, if they are able, stand and speak in their big outside voices so we can all hear?
Thank you, John.
Without repeating. Thank you.
We don't have a mic.
Where's the mic?
I thought we had 2 mics.
Particularly jury nullification. In Baltimore, very frequently, you can't prosecute somebody because the jury, if you ask for a jury trial, the jury refuses to find a guilty plea. I don't know if that's a strategy you want to think about, but it's just, laws underlying this institution. The law doesn't work when juries say, I don't trust prosecutors, cops, the evidence, the judges. I refuse to get a jury trial. You ask for a jury trial, we're not going to convict. And I see that in a lot of areas in Baltimore and other cities around the country.
So just to repeat it for folks who didn't hear, so he was talking about one way that you can undermine has been jury trials who the jury just says, we're not going to convict because we don't trust the evidence, the prosecutor, et cetera, et cetera. And from the organizing perspective, the question is, can we make that happen? Is it replicable? Can we organize it so that we can get people onto juries in large enough numbers that we can guarantee that happens? And that may or may not be possible. And I think the room at the moment is saying no. And at another moment in history, the room might say yes. So we'll see where that goes. But I think this is the way that I want to invite us just to explore a little bit in terms of what are example actions like this that get us moving in ways that push outside of the comfort zone of what we've been doing for those of us who have been minuting. And I'll tell a Quaker story since I've been beating up on Quakers. I'll give a story. Some of you know this story. So in 1970s or so, you guys will be shocked, I'm sure, to find out that the U.S. government was supporting a dictator overseas. So it was a dictator by the name of Yahya Khan. So this is in the late 70s, and so this is under President Nixon. And so, sorry? That's true, you're a Quaker president. Yeah, got to represent. So, oh, that got a reaction. Okay, so the U.S. government was sending arms over to East Pakistan, what we now call Bangladesh, and was flying arms to this dictator, Yahya Khan, who killed hundreds of thousands of people in what is now widely regarded as a genocide, attempted genocide. And the U.S. government was the last of the big international powers to give weapons to this guy. There's sort of an international gentleman's agreement to not supply arms to this guy. The U.S. government was doing it, and a group of Quakers here in this area found out about it and said, what can we do about it? So they looked at what are the different pillars of support. And they thought about this and realized that the arms shipments were being loaded in Philadelphia ports. So they said, well, what could we do about that? So they did something that's, I think, really important. So one, they didn't just launch right away to let's do non-cooperation. They set the stage. So they said, let's do 30 days of practice naval maneuvers where we'll go and we'll jump with canoes and kayaks and et cetera into the water, and we will practice naval maneuvers for a blockade, where we will block the arms shipments. Go Quakers.
Sure.
And so they did this for 30 days, and they allowed themselves to get framed as the crazy Quakers. That was how they got framed, right? So they got 28 out of 30 days TV press. And their story was basically a group of Quakers have lost their minds and da-da-da-da-da. So that was sort of the storyline that they picked up. And at the end of those 30 days, they then found out when the next arms shipments was going to be loaded. So these are high-grade military shipments that are loaded by these International Longshoremen Association. Those of you who have ever had the chance to work with longshoremen, they're wonderful people. I've gotten to work with them, and they are big, primarily men. They're big. They work for a living and carry heavy things. So these are loaded by longshoremen, and what they began doing was they found out when the next time was that one of these massive, these are, I think, like 13-story freighter ships, giant ships in Philadelphia port, when they would arrive at the port, and as soon as they found out, they ran down with their kayaks, with their canoes, and they jumped in the water and began canoeing around. We're going to do a naval blockade. Coast Guard comes by, sees them, pulls them out one by one, and they declare a half victory because they say, look, for the first time, Philadelphia's involvement in this. So they began doing this time after time. So they did this for several different rounds until eventually the ships decided we're not going to come into Philadelphia anymore, we're going to go to Baltimore. Round one of the win. So then they had a little spot, it was before satellite, it was a person, it was people here. Yeah, it was a spy or whatever, thank you. So a spy who would watch on the shore to find out when the next ship was coming into Baltimore port. And then they would get on had a phone tree, and so they would call each other, and then they would, again, get their canoes and so on and so forth, and do this in the port of Baltimore. So they began doing this, action by action. They started to be a cat and mouse game, where the ships would suddenly announce that they're going to show in Baltimore, but then show up in Philadelphia. So they began to describe this as a bit of a win in terms of they were at least getting to them. And they were so scared of them, so scared of these 15, 20 canoes, kayaks. So while they were doing this, they also began thinking of other pillars that they could also look at. And so they did what Quakers often do, and they began hanging out in bars. And so they began hanging out in bars where the longshoremen were. And the longshoremen would look up at the TV, watch the TV, see pictures of these folks, and say, I saw you. You were what were you doing out there? And they began striking up conversations with the longshoremen about what is it that you're doing, why were you doing that, what's your relationship? And so the longshoremen, I don't think they were sold on it as I talked to some of the folks who were involved in it, and they said, we weren't sold on it politically, but we said, this is a particular moment in history that we can support, we can get behind this. So they said, it's too high of a risk for us, ourselves, to just not load the shipments. We can't do that. But if you set up a picket line, we won't cross it. So the next day, there was a picket line. And the longshoremen, true to their word, in Philadelphia refused to cross the picket line because that was such the strong practice of the Union culture. So they said, we won't cross it. Well, that meant military shipment was left on the dock in Philadelphia, and the longshoremen weren't putting it back on. So they stopped entirely using Philadelphia as a port. They said, we're not going to use Philadelphia anymore. Instead, they began using Baltimore. They began going up to New York City, and they used New York City. So, of course, the movement said, great, we'll follow them where they go. And so they went up to New York City, and they got the New York City longshoremen very soon after. It was a lot easier this time, because they already had an in with the Philadelphia longshoremen. And the New York City longshoremen said, great, do the same thing. Picket line, we won't cross it. New York City was no longer stable. Baltimore never broke. Baltimore, they were resistant. They kept doing it. But eventually what they did was they got the National Longshoremen Association, the International Longshoremen Association, which at this point represents up and down on the East Coast. They said at a meeting, we will no longer load arms shipments bound to East Pakistan.
Wow.
The pillar was permanently removed. Nixon, and a couple of weeks later, announced unilaterally, we no longer want to support this dictator. It was his idea. His Quaker interleading. And so I think there are folks who are thinking in this way and moving in this way already in this movement. I think about Incarceration, for example, as an example of a group here in Philadelphia, some of you know, who their action that they generated was trying to stop a new prison from being built in this area. And so their action that they did was set up blockades with desks and apples and textbooks to say, when you're bulldozing to make this new prison, this is what you are bulldozing. So again, and I'm just thinking you could expand that, right, and think about how could we target, say, the construction workers, or how could we target... So again, starting to understand what kinds of people are we trying to remove? Who are we trying to pull out? What's the pillar that we're trying to remove? So I just want to pause here, if that's all right, and just invite you again just to turn to somebody next to you again. I love that just as a way to keep digesting. Just what does that spark, this way of thinking? Maybe it sparks something new. Maybe you've been thinking this way for a while and it excites you. Maybe you don't like it at all, and that's fine by me too. But what thinking is happening inside of you around how this might be a useful model for you and your group? So just take a moment just to share that with somebody next to you, just as a way to assess a little bit. So if you'll finish that thought, that's the downside of having to grab people back, but it's beautiful.
When you get like more than 100 people, you got to do the preceding clap just to get everybody to it.
Do you notice what I did? Just start talking to one person, and people are like, "Ooh, what's he talking about now?" That's my other favorite. So, what did you come up with, or what? How are you thinking at this? Let's hear some thoughts. So, Debbie. And Greg's going to run around with mics now.
Oh, thank you very
much.
much.
Thanks, Greg.
Is this on?
Yes. I think that the police are very vulnerable right now. I was mindful when that policeman in South Carolina shot a kid and then tried to plant evidence on him, and he was arrested and accused of homicide. And there was a lot of discussion at that point among fellow police officers saying this guy is a rogue, he's a real problem, we've seen this in our community. And I'm thinking it would be a good Quakerly approach to go and say, look, we understand that the police are experiencing a lot of difficulty right now, and we'd like to know what you think would make it possible for you to be a more effective police peace officer in your own community, and what's standing in the way of that, and what kind of support can we give you?
So let's pause. Let's take that one just as an example, because I bet there's a reaction to that. So let's see another reaction around that. Yeah. Go.
To what she said?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I just had a total comment.
Okay. Lisa?
I'm torn. I don't really want to support them too much. I think that they're doing the job mostly that they're paid to do, and I'm not happy with that job. I don't want to make them more effective in oppressing people.
Yeah. So go ahead, Sarah.
There is a piece of me that's torn because they are humans. I feel for them. I feel that they're also caught in a system, but I would rather have it be a bigger picture like that than just make them more effective. That's the part that makes me want to vomit.
Go ahead. Sarah?
I was just going to say that one thing that also has to do with police, but would be a different approach, not necessarily getting police, on the same side, but one thing that I think has already been a movement towards is just not calling the police. There's been in various places like a push to not use the police and deal with things, as much as possible, not kind of, I guess, boycott the police as much as citizens can do that. And I think that is another thing that would need to be an accompaniment. You can't say to a community, don't call the police, but if that's something that people feel they want to do, that could be a potential tactic.
So another option. So one of the things that's interesting to me is oftentimes we get attracted to the thing where there's already energy around it. So like police, for example, of all the things like up here, police have been in the news the most right now. And one upside of that is therefore there's often more attention. It's often easier to organize other people around. And a downside is there's often an incredible amount of pressure on them already. So just as a quick context, so about 15, 20 years ago, there's a guy, I think he was Quaker, who went around and did police training, and he began doing nonviolence training for police officers. And he did training. He got so good at it that he got funded by the Ford Foundation and did years and years of training. And they did a longitudinal study where they did like a study over time on what was the impact of it. And after each training, police officers, by and large, were very appreciative. And they said, this is great. We want to have more tools available. We only know a certain set of tools, and this is really great. Feels like we have more resources. And then when they studied it over time, what they found was the behaviors of the nonviolent behaviors that had been taught over just a period of years went absolutely back to the old behaviors. And part of it is you have to understand the police is probably the most, in the domestic side of the U.S., the most top-down structure. Police chief sets the tone, sets how that's going to operate. Police chief gets orders back up. And what they found was anybody who started to veer away from the police protocol got cut down at the top. So that in terms of just understanding the structure of what they are, it's a top-down structure. And so it made it a hard challenge for them to figure out that particular mechanism. So there are other reactions. So I saw your hand and, yeah.
Reactions to what she said?
Or otherwise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about the pillar system and how actually it does work and effectively. Speak closer to the microphone. Okay, sorry. Well, first of all, first comment, I don't, and it's no disrespect, ma'am, I just don't believe in the police structure. I don't believe in it as it's something that the people need. It's a structure that came from slavery, from slave handers and slave holders and slave catchers, and actually created an employment system for them. So the root of policing, period, has always came from slavery and oppressionistic. So I don't believe in that at all. Right. I don't believe in forcing that or supporting that. I'm sorry. I wanted to say about a structure about some
Why are you
crazy.
Sorry?
It's a psychological. In New York, we have a lot of crazy Quakers as well. And I just want to say a little thing about the crazy Quakers in New York. So I'm part of a smaller collective called the Jails Action Coalition, and we have a lot of crazy Quakers on there. And I personally had a lot of tension from stop and frisk and things. So whenever we went in courthouses and city council hearings and board of corrections, and they'd be like, oh, that's five, step out. Yeah, we know you got something on you. But they wouldn't pay no attention to the little crazy old white ladies coming through with walkers through the metal detectors, right? And when we get up to the hearing, those would be the ones that take off their clothes and have a prison jumpsuit on it, and we would do surprise hearings. And we kept doing that persistently everywhere because there was no public comment. So the public weren't allowed to make comments at the Board of Corrections. They had these board of civilians. And we kept doing it to the point that they made public comment available. And they said, okay, you got public comment. And then these crazy Quakers said, great, because we got 250 people outside with testimonies coming in right now. And we've been doing that persistently to the point that they now ask us what did they need to do, and we create the reform.
Great. Great. Yeah. Thanks for running around, Greg.
No problem.
You're looking very energetic.
It's, for me, not a matter of wanting to support the police or not wanting to support the police. It's the wrong pressure point. It's not about the individuals who are police officers. It's the reward structure in which they work, and that reward structure is tied to policies and procedures. It's not even just about the hierarchy, all right? That reward structure breeds a particular culture, and when you put that with issues of implicit bias and internalized racism, you get what we have. But they're not. What I'm telling you is that you can put almost anybody, and this is a little scary to me, to think about. You could take many of the people in this room and put them in that structure, and over time, they would act the same way. That what we have learned about context, I'm a sociologist, so that probably will tell you a lot. But as a sociologist, one of the things that is perhaps most interesting to me is like the research coming out on context of entitlement, a sense that you're entitled or wealthy or privileged. And people who know the game is rigged, still begin to act as if, well, I'm entitled to all of this. I mean, and to the place that the research which say you can take just about anyone, put them in that context, and they will act that way. These police officers are human beings responding to a reward structure that is tied to policies and procedures above them and by key powerful actors and corporations. And to me, to target the police, I love the idea. We think too much just in terms of individuals. We've got to think in terms of systems.
Very good.
Yeah.
So I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, and in Delaware, actually just earlier this week, I heard our Superior Court Judge Strine talking about how guilty people are being treated really unfairly because of the length of their sentences, which they're getting because of the plea bargains. So the plea bargain might be for 5 years, the threat might be 20 years, but actually maybe the individual deserved 18 months. Not saying the individual wasn't guilty, but that 5 years is just way too long. His argument is for a return to power to the judges rather than mandatory sentencing, which we have in Delaware from something called truth in sentencing laws. And these laws bind the hands of the judges and allow the power to be now in the hands of the district attorneys. And so when you look at a pillar called the judicial system, what I'm trying to do is unpack it and say, well, okay, the district attorneys or the prosecutors are a part of the judicial system. So are the judges, so are the laws. So, I think for something like that, you need to take apart one pillar and see how many other pillars have joined to make that one pillar, and then go after that weakest link. Or maybe in this case, the dissatisfaction of the judges is a way to start.
That's right. And one thing that I think will be helpful for us as we think about what areas make sense for us to focus on is, after we win, who has more power afterwards? That's going to your question, your statement around structure, right? So after we win this removal or this thing, has more power moved to, and this is going back to what Lucy was saying, has more power moved to the folks who have been disenfranchised by the structure as it currently is, or have we merely shifted around the power places? Or have we left a wreck? I've run campaigns where we left wrecks. And so I think that question as a guiding question is going to really help us wherever we are, but particularly those of us who are, I think, stepping in and starting to sort out in terms of saying, so after this is over, who's got more power at the end of the day? And using that as one of the key guiding questions for our strategic thinking as we sort of move forward. So I wanted to just catch just a few more hands that I saw. So I saw Emma and I saw Bill. Oh, and then I didn't see, but others have stuck. Good. Okay, so those three, and then we want to do a final thing to close.
Okay, thank you. So privilege has been brought up throughout the whole weekend, and tonight a little bit in particular. And we've all been saying, like, well, who ends up with the power? And I don't know exactly what question is going to come out of my mouth, but I've just been thinking, and I was talking with Jeanette about the crazy old, cute little white Quaker old ladies, or young Quakers, or old men with the T-shirts that say the handmade who can get arrested on purpose, who can go to Moral Monday marches in North Carolina, which is where I'm from, and 200 of them can be like, well, we're going to stay here and get arrested because we know, even if we're young and like have multiple careers in front of us, like that arrest is not going to taint our record forever like it would for people without skin privilege. And that's something that I've been grappling with, because I used to, as a teenage activist, was like, well, it's my goal to get arrested. Like, but now, like, is that a productive way to use that skin privilege? Maybe that's my question. Like, when? How do you know when and where and how? And what is a, like, Quakerly, I don't know if you're a Quaker, you seem like you are, Quakerly and effective.
I've been called worse.
What is an effective and non-offensive way to use that skin privilege?
That's a great question. What do you think, Lucy?
I think that the two things, like to be a part of a campaign that is going to shift the power in the way, like as a strategic choice, and then also like when you're asked, when the people you're trying to support say, I need you to do this thing, I need you to take this risk, because I do not want to get in the system, for whatever reason, and this is a time when you could be. So I think those would be two ways of thinking about it that I would have, and others may have others.
And I would add just another piece, which is when we see other people risking. So Baltimore, these other spots where we see people who are willing to take risks, back them. Because there's nothing as hellish as taking a risk, going out there, doing your thing, and then being under-supported after you've done it. Particularly when other people have said to you, and we want to back you. So I think that would be one way that I would connect to that.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I mean, I think an image of this is one thing that I was talking about today, or earlier today, where, I don't know if you know the story, but Arch Street meeting, a long time ago, the Black Panthers wanted to meet in the Arch Street meeting house, and the Quakers didn't necessarily all agree with Black Panthers, but they were like, we will make a safe space for you, and the Quakers encircled the Arch Street meeting house and protected the Black Panthers from the police. And so I think that's a very powerful image of the role that we can play, is to stand in the way of the state.
So I know there's a lot of hands, but I wanted to follow. So Bill?
Based on what was just said, I thought I would remark that there is a picture in the paper of a number of black civilians standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a line of Baltimore police officers with shields and helmets who were standing behind the men shoulder to shoulder, essentially putting nonviolently themselves in front of the police so that any particularly young people who might want to throw something would have to realize they have to go through these people of their community first. I thought that was a very powerful image to see in the newspaper.
Yeah, that was...
Maybe that was when I was napping. But I wanted... but I wanted to say that I've been a resident of my borough for 38 years. And in that time, I've held elective office and I've worked with police. I've been vice chair of the Human Relations Commission and some other things like that. And I found police, in large part, very helpful, friendly. But I have to remember they're also police officers, and they have their jobs that they do. But one of them took great pains to defend me from something that was coming at me for a role that I had played in trying to support my community. And I guess what I come out of this recognizing is they're often the first to provide first aid to people who need it. They're often first to, say, intervene in a issue where you might have neighbors with a difficult situation, like when my dogs got loose and they were going after another dog, and the police officer came over and said, you're both at fault because your dogs weren't on leashes. So they help diffuse. They can help understand what's in the community if they do their jobs right. Our deputy chief, I know personally, and he frequently will engage in conversations with people in local eating establishments and so on, just to stay in the community and stay talking. So it's just a...
but you're obliged.
But we still have these other problems that are very real. I'm just pointing out that the structure they're involved in is, as the sociologist was telling us, a very serious thing that we need to look at.
And let me just ask, are you open to be challenged around that too? Are you open to be challenged around that too? Okay. Helen, last thought. I know there's more hands, but...
Okay, I've been a little bothered the whole night that we haven't put racism up there as a pillar. And I think racism is the pillar that undergirds this whole thing.
Foundation, you mean?
The foundation, right. And you can knock down some of these props, but racism is still going to be there. And, you know, Emma, who asked, how do we use our white privilege? One of the ways I try to use my white privilege is to teach other white people, right? Because it's white people not understanding white privilege or racism or how they are implicated in any of this that creates a system where all of these things can happen and where people can turn a blind eye and have no clue. So it is one of the things I think we can do. And I put something this morning on Facebook where I tried to summarize the last question that Michelle Alexander left us with this morning. What does it mean individually and collectively, to create a strategic, nonviolent revolution against injustice, not only against the prison system, but against America's recurring forms of racialized social control. So, yeah, that's Michelle Alexander. So you have to, you have to think big, and you have to think racism and how you're going to work as anti-racist advocates in your own communities.
Thank you, Helen.
You're welcome.
Thank you. What a wonderful note to sort of close this session on. And I wanted to, one other thing I really love about this tool is it can be revealing for people around what are the things that we're not talking about, what are the things that we don't really understand. Maybe we don't understand the judicial system, so we got to dig into this a little bit more in order for us to identify where is it that we're going to move, where is it that we're going to shift from one thing to the next. So I know it's, I think it's getting warm in here, among other things. But I also we realized it was a long day for many of you. So we thought it would be great just to take a moment and just breathe together. Breath seems to be something that still is universal. For most of us. That's true. Our ancestors have moved on. Should we do the song? Yeah, so apparently there's a request to stand up. So stand up if you're able and up for it. And do a closing song that I got to do with Dream Defenders, actually, this weekend. And so they enjoyed it, so maybe I'll pass it on. So it's a simple song to sing, so because I grew up in the Baptist church, and we love singing. Quakers, you hang in there. So I really do love y'all. So it's a call and response song. And so therefore, if you don't know the song, it's easy to catch in. So I'll just say the words so you can hear the words as I think is a challenge and sort of carry on an energy for this continued gathering as people gather and hear each other's wisdom, share each other's ideas, and get to experience the friction with each other too, the beautiful creative tension that can emerge. So the words are, and if you'll just repeat after me, and when I rise, let me rise up.
Let me rise up.
Powerfully.
Powerfully.
Like a bird. Powerfully.
Like a bird.
Powerfully.
Powerfully.
And when I fall,
let
me fall down.
Let me fall down.
Like a leaf.
Like a leaf.
Gracefully.
Gracefully.
And when I rise, let me rise up. Like a bird. Powerfully. And when I fall, let me fall down. Like a leaf. Gracefully. And when I rise, let me rise up. Like a bird. Powerfully. And when I fall, let me fall down.
Let me fall down.
Like a leaf.
Like a leaf.
Gracefully.
Gracefully.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.